From the That song is such a powerful song. There's really nothing else we can offer other than a praise. For our King. Thank you, team. In a few minutes, Tristan's getting wired up. He's going to share the message. And next Sunday I will preach on August 13th. Anita Pierce will be back. She about a year ago. She was always lively. Excited to have her back. And on August 20th, we'll have David, I'm not sure how you say his last name, Rosetair or something, from Moose Jaw. Anyways, and that'll be an afternoon service with a potluck. Coffee pots tail on Tuesdays from 2 to 4, and youth group is coming up August 11th. And BBS will be in Ogemaw the 22nd to the 24th. And Judy and Nicole are looking for helpers. So, or cookies. Or cookies. Yeah, cookies are good too. So both. Anyways, I think that's it. Dave, are you going to pray here this morning? He's doing double duty. Doing sound, but he can still bless you off. Hey, Dan, you're going to do the greeting.
Good morning, y'all.
Good morning.
It's that opportunity again. God made it. God gave it. We accept it. We steward it. We give it back. We bless. And He'll send it back to us filled up, overflow. So, Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this opportunity again to plant seeds into your kingdom. We sing a hallelujah that you give everything to us in the first place, Lord. Help us to manage it. And we know that the more we give, the more you give back. We just stand and worship you, Lord. Thank you for thinking of us first. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Well, Tristan, you're wired up. You ready to roll? You want the extra thingy?
Sure. Just for the water. Had the iPad plugged in. So we forgot to plug it in last night. It was only 3% this morning, so I'm at 19% now. So David said, well, if you run out of percentage, then that's when you're done preaching, basically. So, well, hopefully it should have enough battery. We'll find out, though. If need be, I have a backup on my phone. So I told this story at youth group on Friday. So the girls got to hear it. So if they were here today, then they would already know the ending. So they might spoil it, but. So the year is 19, I better double check this just to make sure. 1917. In the town of Halifax, a group of sailors, Halifax is right on the water, so it's a really, really big port town. And a group of sailors sailed into Halifax in a port and come to shore. And they run to this lady holding her infant child, and they grab the baby out of her hands, and they run out of town and into the hills. Now this mother, who just had her baby snatched from her arms, obviously, ran after them, because that's her child. Now, she had no idea what they were saying. They were probably speaking French, yelling at her this whole time. And she has no idea what's happening. They have her baby, so she's chasing them to get her baby, and they run out of town, and she calls them. So I'll ask you, and I asked the youth on Friday as well, what is your perception of this story and what these men did? Probably negative, I'm going to assume. Generally, you don't snatch babies out of mother's arms and run away with them. That doesn't happen very often, and if it does, it's I assume it's a crime. I don't know if it has a legal code for what type of crime it is to snatch a baby out of someone's hands. It's probably a crime. And that's what all these, well, that's probably a crime. You can't really do that. I'm going to finish that story later. And in the meantime, we're going to jump to Habakkuk. Habakkuk only has 3 chapters. I like the prophets, I like Jonah as well, because Jonah, I believe, has 4 chapters. Habakkuk has 3 chapters. I like that. I can get on board with 3 chapters. Isaiah is a little bit tougher for me. It has a little bit more than 3 or 4 chapters. So we're going to start in chapter 3. But before we do, I'm just going to give you a little bit of the context for when Habakkuk is writing. So in chapter 1 and chapter 2, he's basically complaining / praying to God, which is actually a lot of the prophets do that. And he's pretty feeling down, and it kind of indicates that this is a pretty low time in Judah's history. And we're relatively certain that this is very, very close when Habakkuk is writing before the Babylonians invade fully. They had already kind of partly invaded, and this is before they're going to invade fully, and they pretty much destroy Jerusalem. So, they're on the edge of disaster. And Habakkuk initiates conversation, and he asks God, basically, why? Where are you? We're on the brink of destruction. Where are you in the situation? How long will we have to wait for your justice? How long? What is taking so long? And so then we're going to jump to chapter 3, starting in verse 17. So previous to this, he highlights all the things that are happening, and over again, he references Exodus, and then we get to verse 17. Though the fig trees should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive oil in the fields yield no food, the flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. God, the Lord, is my strength. He makes my feet light like the deer's. He makes me tread on high places. So what we see here is that Habakkuk is rejoicing despite the fact there is basically destruction. There is no food. There is no crop. There is no sheep. And yet I will rejoice in the Lord. Now, just that line alone, that's the line we don't like of Habakkuk. I did skip the rest of it because it is a lot. But really, he really just highlights in what dire situation they are. And yet, I will rejoice in the Lord. Now, is Habakkuk happy? No. He's not happy. His circumstances are not good. But yet he rejoices. And so you ask, well, how can you be at your lowest, Everything seems to be going terribly, and yet still rejoice. And so we're going to take a look at this passage, because there's three things that Habakkuk teaches on how to do it. So first off, well, before we get to the three things, here's what suffering does. In verse 19 it says, "He makes my feet light like a deer's, he makes me tread on high places." Now Tanner and Shay, they were just on their honeymoon, and he showed me the pictures of the helicopter ride. And they were up above the mountains. Now it's rather easy to get, not easy, but, well, relatively easy compared to what you had to do a long time ago, to get up on top of the mountains. I mean, people fly over them every single day. If you're going from BC to here, you're going to fly over a mountain. So you get to look down, but before the invention of planes or helicopters, how did you get up a mountain? The only way was to climb it. And it's a rather perilous thing, climbing mountains. I've never done it. I've watched videos of people doing it, and that was enough for me. They have the GoPros on, and when they look down, you wonder, how could any human being do this? Like, it seems that there's infinity beneath them, and they're like, let's keep going up. I'm like, well, I guess after like 100 feet, it doesn't matter anyway, so we just keep going. So, when he says he makes my feet tread on high places, well, high places are inherently dangerous. They're dangerous. But yet, and especially in times of war, if you were at a high place, you were very, very safe, right? It's very hard to attack up. However, it's hard to get up as well. And what we're really being told here is that despite being at the peak is dangerous, when you know what you're doing, when you're equipped to do it, it's actually one of the safest places you can be. And what suffering does is this. Either, if you're equipped and you're ready, it actually brings out the best. It brings out the best in you. But if you're not equipped, you're not ready, it actually brings out the worst. And you've seen this throughout history, and we've probably seen it in our own lives and other people's lives. It brings out the worst. It brings out bitterness, sorrow, anger, resentment, unforgiveness. All those things come out with suffering. But when you're equipped and you're ready, it brings out the best. An example I have, forget the sailor's name, but he was marooned on an island. And he had his journal. That's why we know this happened. And eventually, those marooned, no one came. And one by one, people starved to death. And finally, this last sailor, in his journal, I believe he's the last one left alive, and he's sitting there basically knowing that he's going to die. And he writes that, "I've never been nearer to God. I've never sensed his closeness like this. He is all I need." And he's stranded on an island starving to death. So there's someone, you see, they were equipped, they were ready, and suffering brought out the best. But when you're not ready, it brings out the worst. So Habakkuk actually gives us three things. Well, the third thing is rejoicing, but two steps to get to rejoicing. Repeating, remembering, and then rejoicing. First off, not first off, I'm like second off or third off. We see that rejoicing is a discipline. It's a discipline. It isn't something that comes from circumstances. Happiness comes from circumstances. Rejoicing comes from discipline, from practice. If you read the Bible, you're going to notice something. The authors are always repeating themselves, especially when you're reading like Psalms, any of the poetry. It'll say something one way, and then it will say the same thing, but a slightly different way. Why? An editor would say, well, this is kind of unnecessary. you said this already, let's edit that out to make this a bit more efficient, but yet the Bible says over and over again the same things. There's 4 Gospels. Why? Why not just one? One is good. It's a little bit more efficient. And we see that it's kind of the same thing, but there's a slight difference. You get a different picture, a different perspective. And every time you repeat something, it goes a little bit deeper, and your understanding grows just a little bit more, a little bit more. We see Pharaoh, he gets 2 dreams. Not 1, he gets 2. Now, the dream is about the same thing, but it's a different dream. Joseph, he gets 2 dreams. They're about the same thing, but it's 2 different pictures of the same thing. This is a pretty clear indication that God is trying to teach us something, and we need to do it through repetition. A good example of this are instruments. When you start playing an instrument, unless you're a prodigy, you're going to suck. That is just going to be the case. You will not sound good. No one will really want to hear you. They will maybe endure it, but objectively it sounds bad. That is how it starts. And so, you can start playing the instrument, and you can say, well, I sound terrible. I'm just never going to touch it again. I'm going to wait till I get better at it. Will you ever get better at it? No. If you wait to get better, you're never going to get better. What do you have to do to get better? You got to practice. And you practice, and you do the same thing over and over. It's repetitive. And what ends up happening is that something that used to be basically impossible, well, it now becomes, it's somewhat doable. It's really hard, but you can kind of do it. And if you practice, something that becomes hard, or that was hard, it becomes the second nature. You don't even really have to think about it. It's your natural, I'm playing drums as an example. When I started playing drums, I had to really concentrate just to stay on beat. Right? It basically took all my focus. Whereas now, if I'm playing drums and it's a relatively simpler beat, I'll be playing drums and I'll be thinking about something else, and I won't even remember I'm playing drums. Right? I'm playing drums right now. Why? Because it's second nature. And in the same way that this repetition is needed for getting proficient in instruments, rejoicing is the same thing. It's practice, it's discipline, and it will be hard at first. And then it will be, it's a little easier. And then it will be, now that's your second nature. Something will happen, and you say, I'm going to rejoice in the Lord. It'll be second nature. But it takes time, and it takes discipline and practice. So that was number 1, repetition. Before I get to 2, I want to turn a little sideways here. We're going to jump back to 1917. I'm going to finish that story. Now, there was a ship called the Mont Blanc. And as I tell the story, and you might get more and more familiar with what story I'm telling, there was a ship called the Mont Blanc. And 1917 was World War I. And the Mont Blanc was a French ship. And it was sent to Brooklyn. And the crew of the ship was a little concerned with their cargo. When they get to Brooklyn, they realize the people who are about to load up the ship, they start building partitions out of wood. They lay down cloth and tar. And so the crew's getting concerned. And then they get notified what their cargo is. 62 tons of gun cotton, which is used in the place of gunpowder, 250 tons of TNT, and 2,366 tons of picric acid, which is a lesser known but very volatile high explosive. That's a lot of explosives. 6 million pounds. The captain and the crew are rather concerned. The partitions are set up and the cloth is laid down so that there is It's as safe as it can be. Now, the captain is asked, is he able to convoy across the Pacific with everyone else? Because it's wartime. A single ship is a bad idea. You do everything in convoys. And they asked the captain of the Mont Blanc, can you keep a speed of 8 knots? And this is an old ship, a cheaply built ship, and he says, I can't. I can only keep the speed of 7 knots. And they say, well, you can't travel with us then. You're going to go to Halifax, and you're going to talk to the convoy leader there, and you're going to see if you can join up with them. And so, loaded with 6 million pounds of explosives, the Mont Blanc begins its journey to Halifax. Now, the crew was concerned with their cargo, because at the last minute before they left, and they took many precautions, there was a little bit of extra room on the ship. And they said, well, we have 494 barrels of benzol. Now, I didn't know what benzol was, but it's basically a highly flammable liquid similar to gasoline. They said, well, what if we just slap the benzol, these barrels of benzol, on top of the ship? So they strapped it down with canvas straps, all on the top, just kind of threw them wherever there was room. This turned out to be a bad idea. Basically gasoline. So the crew was concerned. It was a 7-day journey to Halifax, a little over 7 days. No problem. Smooth sailing. They get to Mont Blanc gets to the channel of Halifax, and as they're turning into the channel and they're coming down, there's another ship coming down the channel the opposing way. The problem was that this ship was on the wrong side of the channel. The IMO was they were basically driving on the wrong side of the road. And the captain of the Mont Blanc attempted to avoid a collision, so did the captain of the IMO. And for a moment, it looked like they weren't going to hit. They did. Now, really, in any other situation, it was a very minor collision. The IMO just kind of slightly penetrated the hull of the Mont Blanc. The IMO was completely fine, didn't really sustain any damage, but the Mont Blanc was penetrated above the waterline, so it wasn't taking on the water. In any other situation, it would have been fine. But as we know, and the crew of the ship knew, they had some dangerous cargo. Now, the collision knocked down a bunch of the barrels. The barrels of benzol, this highly flammable liquid, knocked them down, and now there's benzol all over the floor of the ship. The IMO said, well, oopsie. And they start backing out, and they pull the front of their ship out of the side of the Mont Blanc. And what happens when steel scrapes against steel? Sparks. Boom. Not boom yet, but the benzol lights. And unfortunately, it lights in the very spot. If it would have lit on any other side of the ship, they would have been able to get it out. But it lit right where the access to the water was, the water lines, so they couldn't put it out. So now they are in a pickle. They can't get the fire out, and they're loaded with 6 million pounds of high explosives. So what do? You go. The crew hops, the captain gives the order to abandon ship. He locks the steering in place so that it won't spin or anything. It'll hopefully just drift. And they hop on their lifeboats, and they paddle to shore. Now, they're yelling to everyone who's watching. So Halifax, it's basically a cove. And it was kind of in the center of the cove. They're like, get out of here. The high explosive ship's like, you need to go. But no one was really paying attention. They were concerned with the fire. And the fire drew onlookers. Like, oh, it's kind of interesting to look at, right? So people start gathering, looking at the ship. And the ship is on fire, drifts into Pier 6, starts the pier on fire. So the firefighters show up. They're putting out the pier, the fire on the pier. No one realizing what the cargo was on the ship. The sailors, the Mont Blanc crew, they hit shore, they don't bother tying up the boats, and they book it, yelling at everyone they can to get out of here. No one was listening, or very, very few. As they're running, so now they're trying to get out of town, they see a woman holding a baby. And they're yelling at her, you need to get out of here, you need to get out of here, like the ship is going to blow. And that just kind of scared her. She's like, what the heck? And so, in a quick decision, one of the sailors grabs the baby, runs off with the baby, and the woman chases the sailor with her baby off. Then, in 1/15 of a second, the entire contents of the ship exploded. The center reaching 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit, the ship was obliterated basically instantly. And because of it's a steel frame, it basically became a large frag grenade. So all the metal shrapnel shot out. The largest piece of the ship that was found was McCracken, was found 3 miles away. And it looked like a melted candle that had drooped down. So this is the explosion. It's about a 2-mile radius. It then causes an immense pressure wave. Remember the submarine that we all heard so much about? Well, this pressure wave was the same pressure, 14 square inches, as for that split second at the bottom of the ocean there, is the same pressure. And that shattered glass, I can't remember the distance, I don't think I wrote it down, and actually shattered so much glass that the eye injuries were so serious in Halifax because of all the shattered glass that went to everyone's eyes. Not everyone's eyes, because within a 2-mile radius, every building was gone, and 1,600 people basically instantly died. Just an instant explosion. There was 9,000 injuries, and the majority of those injuries were eye-related because of the exploded glass. The Mont Blanc crew only managed to save 2 people. The woman and her child. So, what those sailors did, was that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it was a good thing. But I intentionally told the story in a way that made it sound bad. And this is I did this on purpose. It's a little, maybe dishonest, a little trick perhaps, to illustrate the fact that without context, you don't actually know, you really don't know what you're reading, you don't know what you're hearing. Something that's bad can sound good, and something that's really good can be made to sound bad. And we see this, the Bible is under attack all the time. I mean, if you're interested, just Google, what are some of the worst stories in the Old Testament? And you'll get a nice run-through of, they did this, and this woman was cut into 12 pieces, and the bears attacked 50 children. Do you guys remember this story? There's many stories where you read that just seems terrible. This is terrible. And on the surface it is, but the reality is without context, we don't know what to think. Context is so important. We see this on the news as well. It's possible to read a headline and you think, well, I know what happened. I read the headline and I got a good understanding of what the situation is and who's the bad guy and who's the good guy. But the reality is, without context, you don't know if those sailors maliciously stole a baby and ran into the hills, or they saved 2 lives of innocent bystanders. It's the same situation, just told 2 different ways. So that's a little side note, but it's just to highlight the importance of context. So when you're reading through these stories, and you say, well, this is just bad. I don't understand why God can do this. Well, we're missing a lot of context. And I'm certain that if God commanded something, that there must have been some context that made it the right decision. We just maybe are lacking that, and we need to dive into it more. That's the story of the Mont Blanc and the importance of context. So we're repeating and now remembering. When Habakkuk, now he's also in a disaster. It wasn't as explosive, I guess. It wasn't the same dramatic, but it was a disaster. What he does is he repeats, repetitive, and then he remembers God's goodness. And how he does it is he goes to the Exodus story. You might have noticed this, but if you're reading through the Old Testament, they talk about Exodus quite a bit. It's a rather significant event. In fact, it's basically the whole thing is remembering. Remember how God delivered us. Remember Exodus from Egypt. And I always wondered, what's the big deal? Like, yeah, he freed them, but they got captured and they basically, they kind of get taken over and over again, right? It's just kind of the same story with a new twist. What's the big deal with Exodus? What Habakkuk is doing, and what we need to do in remembering, is he's really remembering the gospel. What is the story of Exodus? The story of Exodus is Israel's in slavery. They're unable to free themselves. So God has to miraculously enter history and set them free. Not through any of their own efforts, but through God's effort. I don't know if you see any parallel there with the gospel that we know, but that was the gospel that they had. It was God freeing them, not on their own merit, but on his merit. And we're supposed to remind ourselves, remember the gospel over and over and over again. When the disciples are on the boat with Jesus, there's a massive storm comes along, and they're all terrified. And they say, well, Jesus, don't you care? And what are they doing? They're looking at the waves, they're looking at the thunder. And Jesus tells them, instead of looking at the waves, instead of looking at the thunder, the danger, you should have looked at me. And remembered who I am. So repetition and remembering. Remembering what the gospel is. And if you can do that, these are the keys to rejoicing. To rejoice is to treasure, to savor, to adore. And this is the reason why Habakkuk was able to rejoice. Habakkuk rejoiced in the gospel as he understood it, which was Exodus. How God rescued them. Now we have a leg up on Habakkuk because we have a far deeper understanding of Exodus and of what it points to. So I messed up my notes here. I'm not quite organized right. Okay, I'm back. So we're going to jump to Mark 10, 17 to 20. And this is Jesus talking about rejoicing. Starting in verse 17. Oh, I'm going to give some context before. Jesus, before this, sends out 72. And he tells them, go to town to town and present the gospel. Tell them the good news is coming. And when they return, they return in verse 17, they return with joy, saying, Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name. And he said to them, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Behold, I have given you authority to tread on serpents and scorpions, and over all the powers of the enemy, and nothing shall hurt you. Nevertheless, do not rejoice in this, that the spirits are subject to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. And the Hebrew word for written is inscribed. And so to inscribe something is, it's usually on stone or a metal of some kind. And I think it's a weak parallel. But when Nicole graduated, we got to sit in a big auditorium with like 700 graduates and a few thousand onlookers, or 1,000 on one side, 1,000 on the other. And one by one, we get to watch 700 graduates walk up, they get their diploma, say congratulations, and they go off, and you do that 700 times. But there was one who didn't get a diploma, they had a plaque. And on the plaque was inscribed their name and their accomplishment. It was an honorary doctorate of the year. They do one honorary doctorate, and this man who got the honorary doctorate, it was inscribed. It was also going to be in the school. So what does this inscription mean? What do these diplomas mean? Well, they're evidence of an accomplishment. You accomplished something. You did something well. And here's your piece of paper to say you did it well, and if you're really cool, you get on the plaque. But most of us were that. Or Nicole, I don't even have a degree, but everyone else wasn't as cool. They didn't get the plaque. They just got just the piece of paper. And that was the symbol of their accomplishment. And we, as people, we rejoice in our accomplishments. It could be the money we've made, the degrees you've acquired, I guess there's farmers, so the acres you farm or the equipment you have. It's just natural. That's how people work. But what we're being told here is not to rejoice in those things. We gotta stop rejoicing in the new car, in work is going well. Because the reality is that those things, if they're what you rejoice in, that's what brings you that's your foundation, that's your anchor of your soul. What happens when those things fall apart? Well, then you're torn completely apart, and what do you have left? Well, you think you have nothing left. But to rejoice in God means that you cannot lose it. Yes. Jesus actually got to meet with Moses. Now, this is on the Transfiguration. And when they're talking, it says, and they didn't really know how to translate it, they were talking, Moses was talking to Jesus about his departure. Now, that's not a very good translation. The correct translation, or the most accurate, would be about his exodus. See, Moses risked his life to liberate his people. But Jesus, who's the true Moses, the ultimate Moses, gave his life to liberate all people. Moses sacrificed the lamb, and he had all the people of Israel put it above their door. So the sons could be spared, right? All the sons could be spared. But the ultimate Moses, who is Jesus, was the lamb who was slain. And God did not spare his only son because he so greatly loved the world, and that is us. Why? So that we may be liberated from sin, evil, and death. We rejoice not that the demons run. We rejoice not that the car is very nice, or that there's money in the bank account, or that the family is doing well. All those are good things. But our source, what we rejoice in, is that our names are written in heaven. See, so this engraving thing, the high priest had all the Israel names engraved on precious stones, and he wore them on the breastplates over his heart. Why? So that when he prayed for Israel, and he was doing the work in the tabernacle, the names of Israel would be right over his heart. See, but the ultimate Moses, the true Moses, Jesus, is the true high priest, stands before the Father and has your name written across his heart. Actually, in Revelation it says that we all have a name that only he knows, which I find pretty crazy. And it's an engraved in precious stone. And because of that, because our names are written in heaven, we can't lose it. It's rather difficult for an enemy to get to heaven and take our names off. In fact, it's impossible. It's a certainty. Our names are written in heaven, and because of that, we can rejoice and have confidence. The way I like to put best, Timothy Keller was quoting someone else, is that the Christians rejoice because our bad things will turn out for good, our good things will never be taken away from us, and the best things are yet to come. Our bad things will turn out for good, our good things can never be taken away from us, and the best things are yet to come. That is what we rejoice in. Like, just the idea that our name is written in heaven, cannot be taken away, cannot be struck down. We have a certainty that cannot be wrong, that nothing in this life, and even Habakkuk is facing death, facing the destruction of his country. So I rejoice in the Lord. And he only had a dim picture of what we have now. So that's where my notes run out. We're kind of all over the place today. Let's pray. God, I thank you. Our names are written in heaven. For those who believe in you, who put their faith in you, Jesus, our names are written in heaven. And we can rejoice knowing that nothing that really matters will ever be lost. That we will spend eternity with you. God, I pray that the struggles any of us are going through, and we're always going through something, I pray, God, that you would give us wisdom and give us strength and the discipline and practice of rejoicing in your goodness, God. That no matter what our situation is, we can rejoice in your goodness, because your goodness doesn't change. Praise in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. That's good. That's why I really like that Van Lake song started today. Come on, my soul. Get with the program. Praise the Lord. Amen. Thank you, Tristan.